Okay, so we've all seen the headlines about this new economic plan, right?
Yeah, it's everywhere you look.
But like trying to actually figure out what it all means,
Right.
that's like a whole other level of confusing.
Definitely.
And that's what we're here for today, folks, our deep dive. We're going to try to untangle some of this. And we're jumping in with, well, let's be honest, it's a pretty scathing critique
Uh-huh.
from the House Budget Committee. Now, love them or hate them, and I know there are some strong feelings out there.
Always.
They do know their way around a balance sheet.
That's right.
So when they say, hold up, this plan could backfire big time, we got to at least hear them out.
Well, you should definitely pay attention.
And they didn't hold back, did they? Increased deficits, slower growth, job losses, like the whole 9 yards of economic doom and gloom.
Yeah, they painted a pretty bleak picture.
But for our listeners who haven't dug into the nitty-gritty of this report, can you give us the lay of the land?
Sure. So it's important to remember that the House Budget Committee, they're generally known for their, well, let's call it a fiscally conservative approach. Meaning they tend to favor less government spending, lower taxes, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So right off the bat, we're seeing this plan through that particular lens.
Okay, so their starting point is already like, hold on, government, don't spend too much.
Exactly.
But they go way beyond that. They say this plan is going to actively hurt the economy. Like, where's that coming from?
Well, their biggest concern, the one they keep hammering on, is the deficit.
Right, because more spending usually means
A bigger deficit unless you're also increasing revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not convinced that this plan does enough of that. They point to examples like, remember back in, mentioned a specific historical example the committee references, spending went up, but so did the debt, and not in a good way.
So they're seeing parallels like, hey, we've been down this road before and it didn't end well.
Right. And for them, it's like trying to fill a bathtub with a faucet running at full blast while there's a giant hole in the bottom. You keep pouring more money in, but it's just disappearing.
Okay, that's a vivid image.
It highlights their core belief, which is that excessive government spending actually crowds out private investment.
Because businesses get nervous or...
It's more that the government's borrowing to fund its spending drives up interest rates, making it more expensive for businesses to borrow and invest. And they see that private investment, not government spending, as the real driver of sustainable economic growth.
So their ideal scenario is more of a hands-off approach from the government. Let the markets do their thing.
Exactly. Create a business-friendly environment, and the rest will follow. Which brings us to another big concern they raised. Jobs.
Right, they weren't exactly thrilled about that part of the plan either, were they?
No. They argued that while higher corporate taxes might bring in some revenue in the short term, ultimately they'll just discourage businesses from expanding or investing in new technologies. And that's where they see the real potential for job growth, in those investments, in innovation.
So it's this balancing act. You want to generate revenue, but not stifle the businesses that are creating jobs.
Exactly. And finding that sweet spot is always tricky.
Okay, so we've got deficits and jobs. Now, the next part, this is the one that really caught my eye, the housing piece.
Ah, yes, the housing subsidy. They had a lot to say about that.
Yeah, because they didn't just say it wouldn't work. They said it could make things worse.
Their argument is that just throwing money at the problem without addressing the root causes of the housing crisis is like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Okay, but how could giving people more money for housing actually make housing less affordable?
It comes down to that supply and demand thing again. Imagine a city where there's already not enough affordable housing. Now suddenly more people have more money to spend thanks to these subsidies. Demand goes up, but the supply of affordable units stays the same. What happens?
Prices go up.
Exactly. Landlords see they can charge more, and suddenly, even with the subsidy, people are struggling even more than before.
Wow. So you try to do something good and it backfires. It's kind of scary how easily that can happen, right?
It's a reminder that the economy is complex. There are always ripple effects, unintended consequences. That's why it's so important to consider all sides of the issue.
Right, which is what we try to do here. It's not about saying this plan is all good or all bad,
But to understand the arguments, the different perspectives.
So let's recap. The House Budget Committee says, danger, Will Robinson. Big deficits, businesses hurting, housing crisis getting worse.
That's their take, viewed through their particular lens.
Right, and it's a valid one, even if you don't agree with everything they say.
Exactly.
But it does leave us with a question, doesn't it? They focused on the potential downsides, But what about the potential upsides?
Right. What are the counter arguments? What benefits might this plan offer that they didn't address? That's something to think about as you weigh the evidence and form your own opinion, because ultimately that's what matters most.
Your own informed opinion. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
Anytime. Always happy to dive into these things with you.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on another deep dive. We'll be back soon with more, so until then, stay curious.